everybody, and thank you very much for joining us even today. We know that in Italy, and especially in Rome, all the people are talking about recent regional elections in Emilia-Romagna, but we know as Centro Machiavelli that international relations, especially foreign policy in East Asia, are also very important. So we decided, in collaboration with the Embassy of Japan in Italy, to organize this conference. We are very delighted to host Professor Shino Watanabe, professor at the Faculty of Global Studies in Tokyo, in Sophia University. Professor Watanabe is a specialist on Japan-China relations. Today, she will talk about the well-known Belt and Road Initiative, and also about the perhaps less known Free Indo-Pacific, another initiative that is at the core of foreign policy of Japan. We are also happy to have today Giulia Pompili from Italian newspaper Il Foglio. She will handle the conference and also handle the Q&A after the lecture. By the way, on your table you have a little survey from Embassy of Japan. We are thankful to you for answering. I think it is only 4 or 5 questions. So I give the floor to Giulia for starting the conference, please.
Yes, thank you very much to Centro Machiavelli and the Embassy of Japan for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here because I don't want to waste time talking about my experience and what I'm doing here. I covered East Asia for several years. And the main point, I think that the main point here now is to recognize that 2019 in Italy was the year of East Asia. Everyone recognized the importance of East Asia and the importance of the relation between Italy and East Asia. 2019 is not only the year of the Belt and Road, of our government sign of the MOU on Belt and Road, but was also the year of entering force of the free trade agreement between EU and Japan. And in January 2020, we recognized that the market and the exchange between Italy and Japan is very huge. And the consequences of the bilateral agreement between Italy and China is not the same between the one between EU and Japan. So we have to reflect on this, and we have to also recognize that everything happened in 2019 happened also because a lack of knowledge of our politicians, but also journalists and media and elite people about East Asia and about the relation between Europe and East Asia. So I'm very happy to be here, and I give the time to Professor Watanabe for her speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm very delighted to be here to talk about this topic in front of you. And then first I would like to ask you very small, simple questions. Please raise your hand if you have ever been to Japan. Nearest. Okay. 4 people. So then, how about China? How many of you have been to China? 3. Almost same. Thank you very much. That will give you some kind of idea, you know. But excellent. Yes. In this presentation, I would like to mainly talk about three issues. First one is Sino-Japanese relations. And then my point here is to make sure that you know that maybe you might have a different idea on Sino-Japanese relations where we are, but my point is, at this moment, I think Sino-Japanese relations has been somewhat stable and not necessarily bad. And it's a kind of we reach a stage, a new stage that even if we have some kind of structural issues, we can manage to maintain at a certain level so that we can avoid going out of a spiral. I think now Sino-Japanese relations reached at this point. Of course, there would be many difficult issues, but it's not the way that I think we already reached some kind of new stage. That's my first point. And second, I would like to talk about free and open in the Pacific. At the same time, of course, we are interested in like a Belt and Road Initiative as well. And then I think now what I want to highlight here is that free and open in the Pacific is not a countermeasure against the Belt and Road Initiative. At the beginning, when like Japan started this kind of initiative, especially China somewhat felt it's a kind of a countermeasure against the Belt and Road Initiative. But as time goes, there are some kind of overlap of interest, not entirely, but some of the overlaps. And then Chinese BRI is under the phase of readjustment. At the same time, Japan's like FOIP is still ongoing developing concept. And you can see some of the kind of convergence of interest in it. That's the second point. And the third point would be, having said that, both like top leaders, Xi Jinping, as well as Shinzo Abe, face many, many difficult challenges. So like we have to see they have many obstacles ahead. Those are kind of 3 points I just want to make. Okay. Actually, today, the Japanese Prime Minister is Shinzo Abe. And I think Japan has been famous for changing prime ministers almost annually. After Mr. Koizumi stepped down in 2006. After that, almost every year, September was a time that the Japanese prime minister changes, almost. But every year, we had new prime ministers. But when Mr. Abe came into power in December 2012, actually, it was his second administration. It was not his first time. As you can see, his first administration was from September 2006 to September 2007, just 1 year. After that, we have seen a kind of rotation of like 5 prime ministers. And then again, December 2012, Mr. Abe came into power, right? But after that, even up to the moment, Abe is very interesting because he is the longest serving Japanese prime minister in the modern Japanese history. So like he served more than 7 years. It's if you look at the Japanese prime ministers for the last 10 years, that is really exceptional. And as long as something unexpected happens, his administration is likely to continue at least until September 2021. So like almost like another 1 year and a half. So like I think his administration could be really, really long. It's a kind of, so in that sense, we are in a kind of exceptional stage. Very interesting moment. Anyway, the Abe administration has tried to improve like its relations with China. And then during the first administration, Hu Jintao, former Chinese president, and also Mr. Abe decided to pursue mutually beneficial relationship based on common strategic interests. And then again, once his second administration started, he tried to improve the bilateral relations. Unfortunately, for the first 2 years, from 2012 to 2014, there had no summit meetings between Xi Jinping and Abe. 2 years, no kind of direct top-level channel. But November 2014 was the first time that they had a summit meeting. At the time, it was held on the sideline of APEC multilateral meeting. But anyway, that was the first point. Since then, both leaders have held 12 times like summit meetings, 12 summit meetings. And the latest one is back in December last year in Chengdu, China. They have the summit meeting, making use of the occasion of trilateral summit meetings among Japan, China, and South Korea. In any way, 12 meetings, that's a kind of good figures. So like now you can see at least like bilateral like top level meetings have been convened like several times for a year. And these two pictures show you, where we were and where we are now. Can you see any differences?
Faces.
Yeah, at least like, you could see, at least like Mr. Xi is smiling. And also you could see like two national flags behind them and a couple of new developments. At least like you can see, this is very interesting, but this is a process. I have to quickly go over, but if you are interested, I will show you more later. In any case, this is where we are at the kind of high level. And then I think one of the turning points in bilateral relations was in October 2018. It was the occasion that Prime Minister Abe visited Beijing to have a bilateral summit meeting. At the time, it was a good timing because it commemorated 40th anniversary of Japan-China peace treaty that was originally signed in 1978. So like a 40th anniversary of peace treaty that was in October 2018. Since then, Abe and Xi tried to bring the bilateral relations to a new level. And then I think this good momentum continues. And then here's a kind of a simple statement. But last year, in 2019, Japan hosted G20 in June in Osaka. And at that time, Xi Jinping came to Japan. And this year, Japan will host Olympic Games in summer. And now, I think it's almost certain that Mr. Xi makes his first state visit to Japan this spring. So in maybe 3-4 months, Mr. Xi will be coming to Tokyo. That would be a very big moment for the bilateral relations. Because if he comes, shuttle diplomacy, meaning like a mutual visit by top leaders annually, will restart since 2018. Like 2018, like it's Abe visited, and last year Xi Jinping came, and this year again Xi Jinping comes, and then you'll see a kind of good momentum continues. And as you know, 2022 China is going to host Olympic game, Winter Olympic game in Beijing. Again, that would be another moment maybe Japanese Prime Minister will go. In any case, these are top level relations. And then those relations are really important. At the same time, we should understand that for Japan, China is one of the most important partners in terms of trade. And if you look at this chart, US, Italy, and Japan, the top part is US, the middle part is Italy, and the last part is Japan. But my kind of point is, those yellow parts, meaning China is the top trading partner. And if you can look at the chart, for instance, in 2018, China was most important trading partner, both in terms of imports and exports for Japan. So like a top partner for Japan in terms of trade was China. And almost the same situation was for the United States. But Italy, totally different. So like, Japan is more dependent on China than Italy is. In any case, also China is dependent on Japan than Italy does. So in that sense, like even economic relations, China has been a very important partner. This is a kind of chart of Chinese exports. The blue, line is Japan. In other words, for China, Japan is the third important market for Chinese products. It's a third. And as for imports, again, the blue line is Japan. You can see Japan is the second important importer for China. So you can see how those economies are mutually dependent. And also, as for the public opinion, I would like to show you, introduce one interesting survey. Maybe you know that in China, it's really difficult to conduct public opinion in the PRC. But there's one official, somewhat semi-official opinion poll conducted by Japanese NPO called Genron NPO. It's a non-partisan institution. And also China Daily, it's a Chinese media. They work together to conduct a survey at the same time, both in Japan and in China, and from 2005 to the present. So you will see a kind of nice time series analysis. And this NPO published data in English as well. So if you are interested, please go to the website. You could get the detailed information on the joint survey in English as well. Of course, in Japanese and in Chinese. But in any case, I will show you the latest result briefly. And this is kind of a poll conducted in September 2019. And those respondents are above 18 years old. And the education levels are somewhat similar. And 1,000 responses from Japan and 1,600 responses from China. So it's a good number. And this is the chart. I would like to briefly highlight. It's impression of one another's country. They're asking Japanese respondent, what's the impression of China, and the other, vice versa. And if you look at this chart, this like a red line on the top is a Japanese public opinion who see China unfavorably. So you can see very high, portion of Japanese people see China unfavorably. And then if we look at the gray line, it's a second from the bottom, the gray line. It's a Chinese public opinion seeing Japan favorably. So Chinese people tend to have a more positive view on Japan than the others. So it's somewhat looks a little bit different from what we imagine. But I think public opinion of Japan is somewhat really severe than that from China. In any case, these are very interesting results you could look at on the web. But some of the reasons I just want to highlight. Favorable impression of the other countries. The top one, black letters, Japan. And the bottom one, red letters, China. Both increased familiarity and interest in traditional Chinese culture and history, improve living standards in China. Those are Japanese answers. And then remarkable growth of Japan's economy, Japan's beautiful environments and landscapes, high quality of Japanese products are the Chinese answers for having favorable opinion. And more interestingly, reasons for unfavorable impression are more very interesting. The top one, situation surrounding the Senkaku Islands, and the different political system between Japan and China, action going against international rules. Those are the top 3 reasons why Japanese public see China unfavorably. And in contrast, Japan's lack of proper apology and remorse, and Japan's nationalization of the Diaoyu Islands. Diaoyu Island is a Chinese name of the Senkaku Island. And Senkaku Island, I just want to highlight, but it's a part of Japanese territory, but China has totally different ideas, unfortunately. So they use the Diaoyu Island for their name. And also the Japan's attempt to encircle China with the US. These are the Chinese perceptions. So you can see there are many other reasons, but I just highlight the top 3. So these, and also obstacles to building better China-Japan relations, somewhat similar, elements. So these are the kind of public image of the other country. And this chart shows you a kind of, it's also another interesting survey conducted by Japan Bank of International Corporation, a policy bank, and which asked Japanese business people which countries are most promising in the midterm, the 3-5 years. As you can see, the blue one is China. So China has been the top, most popular destination for Japanese business for long. So even though the Japan's perception, general public's perception is somewhat mixed, but you can see business, China has been a really, really important partner. Interestingly, last year, 2019, China dropped the second rank. The first rank, it's too small, but it was India. So nowadays, India and China are top 2 most attractive destination for Japanese business. So India is very another promising area. But anyway, today, we don't want to cover, India. And again, so now you can have a very basic idea of where we are in terms of bilateral relations. And then I just want to briefly talk about free and open Indo-Pacific. And of course, some of you are very familiar with this concept. So this chart shows the gist of the Free and Open Indo-Pacific initiative. We say FOIP, so sometimes I call FOIP as abbreviation. And the FOIP has 3 pillars, right? First one is rule of law, freedom of navigation, market economy. And second pillar, economic prosperity and interconnectivity. And third one, peace and stability. So those the basic idea that FOIP has is very, I think this is really what many democratic countries endorse. And then this is sometimes assumed as a countermeasure against China's BRI. But some of the parts, interconnectivity, for instance, and peace and stability, and economic prosperity, are exactly what BRI tries to pursue, even though different ways of ideas, different measures. But some of the ultimate objectives actually we share in common. So it's not necessarily competing against each other. Some of the parts definitely are different. But especially since 2017, I think we are in a very interesting age in terms of BRI and FOIP, because in June 2017, it was a time that the Japanese Prime Minister Abe identified 4 conditions to cooperate with China in terms of BRI. So he didn't oppose the BRI itself anymore. He just identified the conditions. And those 4 conditions are somewhat obvious, but for instance, the first one is open infrastructure. In other words, people can use infrastructure, and infrastructure cannot be excludable, in a sense, open infrastructure. And second one is fair and transparent procurement. So procurement process should be transparent and fair. In other, not only Chinese companies, but also other companies can join the bidding process and so forth, and including Japanese companies. And also the third one is economically viable projects. So if the projects are infeasible, then it's not necessarily good to implement. So economically viable project. And also fair and sound fiscal situation. In other words, fiscal sustainability, that's the 4th condition. So as long as Chinese projects satisfy these 4 conditions, Abe said Japan can cooperate. So that was 2017. And last year, 2019, actually, when China hosted the 2nd Belt and Road Initiative Forum in Beijing, Xi Jinping delivered a speech, and he used the term high-quality economic cooperation that BRI is going to pursue. High-quality cooperation. That was the first time he mentioned that way. So now Xi Jinping also worries about the quality of BRI projects and high quality, and also the Abe's 4 conditions somewhat overlap. So now I think my view is, now we are in the age of BRI 2.0, and China is making some adjustment. At the same time, even though Xi Jinping wants to modify the BRI, how it plays out is a very difficult question, because China is such a big country, and also BRI is not initiated by Chinese government itself, right? The Chinese companies are the major driving force behind the BRI. So even if the Communist Party has some idea, sometimes it's difficult that those policy is implemented on the ground. So there's a lot of difficulty implementing Xi Jinping's idea. But anyway, we have to see reality check how far China can do. But some of the idea China mentioned overlaps Japan's idea of a FOIP. And these are kind of main point. And then, of course, I don't want to spend so much time talking about detailed, challenges, but I just want to highlight. Both Xi Jinping and Abe now have some difficulty. And then any top leaders have difficulties, but as for Xi Jinping, here. Xi Jinping has, for instance, trade deal with the United States, That's a really difficult issue for him, right? And also, like economic slowdown is a kind of a obvious fact. 6.0% economic growth sounds really great to Japan, actually, and perhaps maybe great to Italy. But in China, 6% economic growth is not something they can be proud of. They used to have more than 10% economic growth, then it's almost like a half. And then high economic growth is the source of legitimacy of Chinese Communist Party's rule nowadays. So like that's a really key issue CCP leaders want to maintain. And then again, also since last year, all of a sudden, in Hong Kong, demonstration started. And that was a big challenge for Xi Jinping and also for the kind of Hong Kong leaders as well. But how to deal with this Hong Kong protest is a very big challenge for Xi. And as you know, just a few weeks ago in Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen was re-elected. That was not a favorable candidate for the Chinese Communist Party. And as you know, that Tsai Ing-wen actually was not that popular, but only because, just my observation, but the biggest reason why why Tsai was re-elected was a Hong Kong demonstration. And then I didn't write, but as you know, now China is suffering from a new coronavirus outbreak. It all came all of a sudden, but it's a big challenge to Xi Jinping. It could somewhat undermine his leadership if he makes some mistakes. So now, like, he has so many challenges. And as for Abe, again, he also has many challenges. The first one is like a FOIP itself. In Japan, among the academic circle, we have a kind of debate. What is FOIP, actually? FOIP is not necessarily a clear-cut, straightforward concept. And some people say FOIP is a concept, and some people say it's an initiative, and someone even say it's a strategy. So it's some kind of debates going on inside the Japanese academic circle, not like a policy people, but more like academic circle. What does it mean? But it's an interesting initiative because Japan has not been quiet. You know, Japan doesn't have this kind of big idea for a while. So like FOIP is a very interesting case, but it's still kind of undergoing concept or initiative. So like we have to, think about it more in depth. And also like it also has difficulty in implementing FOIP itself because FOIP is not something that the government can do, but it's like a private money, and Japanese companies are also important driving force behind FOIP. But how to attract private companies, how to attract private capital, a big challenge for the Japanese government. Japan is not China. We don't have like a state-owned enterprises, which can do whatever Communist Party order. So in that sense, different. And also like, even though Sino-Japanese relation has been stable, both countries have some problems trying to identify kind of actual concrete case of Japan-China economic cooperation in the third country. Actually, 52 memorandum was signed when Abe visited China in October 2018 to have Sino-Japan cooperation in third countries. So it's a nice showcase to highlight the kind of BRI and the FOIP cooperate each other. But up to this moment, as far as I know, there's no concrete kind of project yet. So maybe you might see some new project when Mr. Xi will visit Japan. I'm not sure, but it's a kind of interesting moment to see. And also, lastly, it's too early to talk about post-Abe, but of course we have to see the reality, and maybe September 2021, after that, who will be the successor? That's a really big challenge for Japan, because Abe's administration is such a long administration, a record-breaking administration, then someone after him would be really will face a big challenge anyway. So Japan has also important but difficult challenges. So now, I just want to give you some concluding remarks as a springboard for further discussion. The Indo-Pacific faces many challenges for strengthening the regional order, that's obvious. But BRI is now at a turning point, and I think FOIP is also a flexible concept, and also it's still developing. And then I did not mention up to this moment President Trump, but that's something like I cannot ignore. I don't want to argue about it, but anyway, I should say something, and I would say President Trump is the wild card. He could change the entire landscape all of a sudden. I'm not sure how you see his possibility to be reelected, but in Japan, as far as I know, majority believe that again President Trump will serve for the next 4 years. That's a kind of current observation. And then in any case, how BRI and FOIP coexist in the region affects the future of the Indo-Pacific. And perhaps high quality infrastructure is a kind of solution that which BRI and FOIP coexist, given that Xi Jinping's speech aiming for high quality economic cooperation under the BRI. So because of the time, I just talk briefly about several issues, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Watanabe. I have 3 brief questions for you, and then we can have a question from the public. The first one is about the relation between China, Japan, and South Korea. And my question is, can China replace the US as a negotiator between Japan and South Korea? And the second question is about the coronavirus and on the challenge that the Xi Jinping government is facing. How much can affect also the relation among the East Asian countries, because for the tourism in Japan is depending on tourism from China. So, and the third question is about FOIP. In the latest 2 years, I recognize that Japan is setting an agenda about the relation with China, how to deal with China. Japan has the answer, and FOIP can be an answer. But the power of the Belt and Road, actually in the European countries mainly, is about soft power. But Japan is not challenging the Belt and Road on the soft power sector, like, I don't know, facing big ceremonies and I don't know what changed actually in 2019 in the relation between the European countries and China, but something changed. And China was the most recognizable country in East Asia. So if Japan is trying to give us okay, it's not an alternative, but actually is an alternative with FOIP, what is missing? I don't know, state visits or more presence of Japan in Europe, in the European countries. Why we always talk about the Chinese 5G, but we never talk about, for example, Japanese or South Korean technology on 5G. And I don't know, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very interesting questions. The first one, among the trilateral relations like Japan, China, South Korea, can China play the role of the United States, right? And then I don't think, in a U.S. role means like trying to cultivate good relations or become if like Japan, South Korea relations are bad, and then U.S. intervene, but that kind of role China plays. Right? I don't think China. I think China is maybe willing to do that. Like one day, I was asked by some Chinese academic who had influence in the policy circle in China, and that it was last November, when still Japan, South Korea relations had been bad. What kind of things China can play to, facilitate the bilateral relations? I was shocked to hear his kind of question. But anyway, China is now, it indicated that at that time, China was thinking some ways that, China can play a role of the United States in Asia, maybe, as you answer your question. But I think that China, Japan, South Korea are kind of very important stakeholders, and then it's China has its own problem, and then Sino-Japanese relations, or even China-South Korea relations, and then I don't think China can play kind of a U.S. role, which is a little bit distant, and they try to take things that's neutral. So it's China is a very important critical stakeholder, and then our job is to try to stabilize the bilateral relations. Interestingly, if you think about the trilateral relations, Japan, South Korea, and China, there are 3 bilateral relations, right? Japan, China, and China, South Korea, and South Korea, China. And I noticed so far, one of the 3 bilateral relations have been strained, have been severe. I mean, we haven't seen timing when all 3 bilateral relations are good, right? It's it's really strange. It's not a causality, but somehow you cannot have a very stable 3 bilateral relation up to this moment. So in that sense, China is a very important stakeholder, but cannot be a neutral, kind of intermediator, I could say. And as for the coronavirus, that's a really, really hard situation China is facing, and it came all of a sudden, and I think it's not a Chinese problem anymore. It's I think global issue, and then international society should cooperate, and then of course economically, for instance, as you mentioned, Japan receives so many tourists from Japan, about 10 million people a year. So that would. If we don't have Chinese tourists because of this new, coronavirus outbreak, definitely, Japanese economy will hit severely and will become receive negative influence in terms of economy. At the same time, I noticed I did a report, one of Japanese media talking about Japan's SDF, self-defense forces, are now ready to go to China to assist if they are requested. So I think this is a really sad situation, but in a strange way, it's a kind of good momentum, a good opportunity, a good timing for Japan to cooperate with China somehow and show Japan's willingness. So it could further improve the bilateral relations if this is handled nicely. And also, not only Japan, but also other countries as well, I think. And it's easy to criticize China by looking at some actions, but China is a very complex country, difficult country. If China is severely criticized, it's really hard for China to change its course. So in order to have a cooperative attitude, coming from China, we have to be very nuanced, and we have to be nice too. So I think this is a nice case to show our willingness to engage in China in a very healthy way. And the third one, what your question is, what's that? FOIP, right. And Japan and South Korea, what is that? Yes, Japan's FOIP and China's BRI. And then in Europe, people are talking about China, but unfortunately not Japan, right? So what is missing? What kind of strategy Japan can take? That's actually, I want to ask your advice, right? But I think, unfortunately, I don't know, but if you hear stories about China in Europe, I don't think those stories are always positive, right? Like 5Gs or some kind of criticism, like investment. So I don't know. Talking about China here is, in a sense, good because China becomes famous, but at the same time, the content of the talk is not necessarily positive. Then if Japan was in the position of China, I don't think that's a really ideal situation, right? So nothing serious happens, that's why people don't talk about Japan. People don't criticize Japan. If that's the case, it's not bad. But having said that, it would be very nice people in Europe are interested in Japan So I would like to ask you questions or ask you answers or suggestions, like rather, because I just came here 2 days ago and I'm familiar with the situation in Europe, but what is missing? But maybe that's a very important question for Japan, I think. Right, thank you.
Thank you. We have, yes, please.
Thank you, Watanabe-san. Francesco Gaglietti. I have one question for you. Do you think that the overall outside perception is that the FOIP is still in its infancy, in its early stages? As you say, it's not even clear whether it's a concept, a strategy, an initiative. But seen from outside, it's still a very small club. Japan, Australia, the States, the UK. What is visible is that it's a democratic club as opposed to a mainly, largely authoritarian community, which is the BRI community. So the differences are very conspicuous. What is not clear, however, is whether there is a willingness of the current club members to extend an invitation to Europe or to selected European partners. I'm not sure this invitation has ever been made to Italy. Italy thrives on export, on trade. It's a global trading power. We have a vital interest in protecting sea lanes in particular so that our merchandise goods can arrive anywhere. So in theory, at least on the maritime part, which is a big component there, we could be interested. But of course, things have become very complicated. The Mediterranean is, well, it has Chinese presence and fingerprints everywhere these days. So I'm not sure, the question is, do you think that FOIP will become a bigger club than it is today? Is there such an idea? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting question. And FOIP, I think BRI and FOIP have something in common and some differences as well. And the BRI, China is somewhat really enthusiastic about extending invitation to BRI, and the BRI members and not, as in the case of AIIB, whether or not a country joins the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank or not. So those like a membership invitation that sometimes China really emphasize, but I don't think FOIP is that. It's more like an inclusive initiative, and it's not whether you join or you don't join. That's not that kind of things. It's not like a club thing. But having said that, I can see like core kind of participants or like a core drivers look like Japan, US, and Australia, and nowadays India, core, and also like nowadays like some European countries like UK and also France are somewhat interested in this initiative. But it's more like it's up to other countries how to make use of FOIP, rather than like a FOIP decides which country is a member or not. And also if you look at the documents talking about FOIP, you will not find any kind of term like value. It's not like a value diplomacy type argument. Whether only democratic countries can join or it's not like that kind of value part. I don't think I find in like a FOIP related documents. I think it's more like initiative, but it's Japan's version of FOIP is emphasizing the economic development. Like if some countries want to not participate, but someone engage in some projects, then they can just come and do whatever. It's not like a membership. That's my understanding. And also, my question is, if let's assume that for instance, Mr. Abe come to Italy and ask the current Conte administration, do you want to engage in like a FOIP? If he asks, what would be Italia's answer? Is that
he already asked? You already asked, and he already answered. Yes, sure, we are in, no problem.
Okay.
So, but it was like 4 months after sign the PRA, so it was some kind of strange to enjoy the PRA and Max enjoy also the FOIP. Strange situation in Italy.
So there's no MOU involved, right? In case of FOIP. But China's case, like a MOU signing and then making a kind of a membership. So it's somewhat different, right? Thank you.
More questions? Please.
Thank you very much. Even though I said like FOIP and BRI have something in common, one of the differences, the major difference is like a security field. And the freedom of navigation definitely is something that Japan doesn't want to make compromise. And I don't think that issue they have any agreements. But at least like I think they understand that at least they should avoid unexpected incidents or something like that, right? But beyond that, I don't think they reach any consensus on that. It's like there are some kind of differences as well, of course, right?
Please.
Professor Watanabe, I'm very interested that the attitude towards each other country is determined by the cultural issues. And first of all, the favorable impressions are about the ancient history of the China and the recent cultural issues of the Japan culture. But the unfavorable questions are about the history of the 20th century. So it's very interesting to me to understand about the possible solutions of the quarrel between China and Japan on the history of the 20th century. Because in Italy we have just a very far echo of the debate in the Far East Asia. And I'm an historian, so I'm very interested in this problem, this question. Thank you so much.
Your question is there any solution for
yes,
historical?
a solution of the, if there are some attempts to some year in 5 years ago, there were a big conference in East Asia about recent history, and the conclusion was that they agree that they not agree about the history of the 20th century. There are some step towards, or simply they agree to don't speak about the 20th century and then concentrate them on the more ancient history or recent history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. History is really difficult, especially between Japan and China. And then, like, if either side handles this question wrongly, then it always comes back to the, current bilateral relations, and then sometimes it's totally can destroy kind of a cooperative atmosphere. But now today's situation is, as I think, just my observation or understanding, but both sides try not to treat, not to make the history issue dominate the entire bilateral relations. Even though we understand there are issues which are really hard to solve, and then both of the perception differ widely, and then it's really hard to reach consensus. And how to understand history, how can I say, Chinese history and the Japanese history do not necessarily the same, even though we are talking about the same kind of incident. But having said that, and there are kind of a joint effort among both countries' scholars to do kind of research and they publish a couple of their, interpretation of specific events. There's a kind of joint research already taking place, but still, that's a kind of sideline of the bilateral relations. And how to avoid the history issues dictate the bilateral relations. That's that kind of a state now I think we are in. But as you said, I think it's really important, issues, and then we have to take several steps to, and I don't think these steps will solve the issue, dramatically, but yeah, we have to keep, make efforts. And some of the efforts are actually taking place, but very, very slow going. As for the kind of joint research, even though Chinese top scholars on history and Japanese top scholars history cooperate and do conduct several year joint research, and then actually they produce outcomes some kind of papers, and then in Japan their products were mostly published. But the same one was supposed to be published in China in Chinese, but that side China stopped. It was too controversial for China to, open the debate to the public. So that even though the research was there, but in China it was not read. So that's still simple joint research still is at this stage. So it's really difficult. We have to go so many steps, I guess. Right, thank you.
We have time for one last question. Okay. No one wanting to be? Yeah, please, ma'am.
Hello, Melanie Kuo from Taipei Representative Office in Italy. I'm actually going to take this opportunity to reflect on one of the comments that was made before and then post another question. I did hear Professor Watanabe commenting on President Tsai's re-election in Taiwan a couple of weeks back, saying that it's, kind of due to Hong Kong protest, which is true in a sense. However, it is not... Basically, I think it tells the young generation, because the influence is really on the young generation, having witnessed what is happening let's say it is not the Hong Kong protest that helped Tsai to win the re-election, win the votes from the young people. It's actually the government or police handling of the situation, reminding or telling the Taiwanese young generation that the one country, two system is really not something that they can trust or have any slightest hope on. That I'm commenting on the younger generation, where other groups of people think differently in my country. But eventually that kind of made possible to a 75% turnout of the vote. And that kind of changes the course of the election. I have a question concerning the BRI and the FOIP, because in Europe, for example, China has been investing a lot in Central Eastern Europe through the BRI projects in infrastructure. So they've been investing on the construction of high-speed rails for Central European countries and all that. But the implement and also the decrease of investment, or things that was promised but not actually realized the way it was promised, is also causing doubt in Central Eastern Europe about how reliable the BRI is, or is it actually something that we can all put our hope in? So in the sense that, in the situation, if in the coming few years the BRI is slowing down, if it's proven that people don't want to work so closely with China anymore, do you think Japan is ready to take over using FOIP to substitute BRI? Thank you very much.
First, thank you very much for your comment on Ms. Tsai's re-election. It's more like a clarification that helps us a lot. And as for the question whether Japan is ready to take over the role of China, but I don't think that's possible, because scale is so different. But perhaps what Japan can do is try to maintain the high quality, the level of infrastructure, and then pick up project that satisfy that kind of conditions, and then Japanese funded project, maybe some of the new projects Japan can fund, and then that would be beneficial for developing countries having a high quality, durable infrastructure, and then with somewhat beneficial conditions of loans coming from Japan, and maybe not only Japan but also other multilateral financial institutions like ADB or World Bank and so forth. So some of the projects, good projects Japan can do, but because money is somewhat limited, and then we cannot do the same thing as China's BRI has done. At the same time, I don't think Japan should do exactly what China has done. And Japan should, show some kind of standards, high standards that what those projects are supposed to be, and then somewhat give advice to developing countries not to spend so much money, even if money is offered from China or other countries, if it is not useful for their own economic development. So in a sense, too much projects sometimes is more counterproductive to economic development in recipient country. At this moment, it's okay to have a lot of infrastructure, but those infrastructures are not for free, right? It's in that sense, it costs later much. So in that sense, in any case, I don't think Japan can take a role of China, and I don't think Japan have to.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Wait.
No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Julia, of course. Thank you, Professor Watanabe, for this interesting lecture. Hopefully, this was only the first step, the first occasion to setting the record straight for a better understanding about BRI, about FOIP. And thank you for joining us. I'm especially thankful to Embassy of Japan in Rome, and see you to our next events.